After Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, the only problem Raymond Griffith's Confederate spy Jack has at the end of his 1926 comedy, Hands Up, is which of his lovely two-woman sidekicks he should marry. Just in Jack's moment of indecision, a friendly old man rolls up in a carriage and greets them. Several women in single file exit the carriage as the old, bearded man introduces each one as his own wife. Who might this man be? Well, Brigham Young, of course. Jack has found a solution. Why not marry both young women? The film fades to black as the three head off in their carriage to Salt Lake City to all live happily ever after together. Now fast forward to the Salt Lake City of August 1940. Once Raymond Griffith's destination, Salt Lake City now hosts the world's largest movie premiere. 20th Century Fox stars Tyrone Power and Linda Darnell ride down the boulevard as audiences cram into 7 theaters that simultaneously premiere the movie. What film might be causing such an excited throng of fans? Well, the 1940 historical epic Brigham Young, of course. Just how did such a polarizing figure in American history as Brigham Young, in merely a decade and a half, go from an incessant punchline to the star of a patriotic historical epic? Grab a bowl of Jell-O and a 6-pack of Diet Coke and join me on a trip to Salt Lake City to find out. As shown by the raucous Salt Lake City crowd at Brigham Young's premiere, the film's appeal to Utah and a few western cities with high Mormon populations was readily apparent. But for the rest of America, no one was clamoring for a historical epic of the Mormon emigration west. Why on earth would 20th Century Fox choose such a project with such a questionable appeal? Despite the risk, producer Darryl F. Zanuck felt so confident in the film that he developed it as a centerpiece of Fox's 1940 season, making it amongst Fox's most expensive films. With a lot at stake, 20th Century Fox was still well aware of the uphill battle they took on in portraying Brigham Young as the hero and protagonist of the film. Darryl F. Zanuck, in response to an early draft of Brigham, wrote that, "There is no way that you can conceivably excuse to audiences of the world the idea of one man having 8 or 9 bed companions. Brigham Young has been used as a standard vaudeville joke for years, and it is going to be awfully tough to try to explain to the public that he slept with more than one woman because of religious or economic problems." Prior to 1940, mainstream American audiences had only seen negative on-screen portrayals of Mormon characters. Whether the henpecked husband, bumbling around to take care of dozens of his wives and children, or the wife-stealing human trafficker polygamist, Mormons were either characters of derision or intense shock and outrage. In large part because of this negative association, Zanuck did understand the need to at least address polygamy directly in the film. He instructed fellow producer Kenneth McCowan, "The polygamy angle should not be ducked. To do so would rip all semblance of authenticity from the story. It should be hit hard and deliberately. To make the story of Brigham Young and Mormonism and dismiss or timidly handle polygamy would be like making Alexander Graham Bell without the telephone, Jesse James without guns, or a Columbia picture without director Frank Capra." As we will see, there is a fine line between addressing polygamy and painting an accurate historical picture of it. The film starts in the Mormon settlement of Nauvoo, Illinois, in the year 1844. The Kents, a local Mormon family, are hosting their non-Mormon neighbors, the Webbs. Jonathan Kent and Zina Webb quickly hit it off and instantly become the film's central romance. Hoping to scare the Mormons off, a mob descend upon the gathering, shooting Zina's father dead, burning down the Kent family home, and beating Jonathan's father to death. After the mob's raid of the Kent home, we meet Joseph Smith, the faith's founder and leader, who consults with his fellow church leaders on how to best answer the increased violence the Mormons have been subject to. Before finding a solution to the problem, Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram are arrested and tried for treason. While being held in Carthage jail, a mob breaks in and murders Smith, continuing the cycle of violence. Brigham Young, who we first met giving an impassioned plea at Smith's trial, emerges as Joseph Smith's successor amidst even more threats of violence from their now emboldened, bigoted neighbors. Forced by the Illinois government to leave Nauvoo in the state, Brigham Young is now tasked with the challenge of keeping his people together and safely finding a new home, free of persecution far out west. Meanwhile, Zina stays with Jonathan and the Kents as they travel west, despite her not being Mormon. As the church's new leader, Brigham feels insecure and unsure if God truly wants him to fill the shoes of their beloved martyred prophet. It doesn't help that many disagree with Brigham's decision to settle in Utah. hell-bent on going onward to California, instead to look for gold. All throughout the journey west, Zina and Jonathan fall in love, going through the highs and lows of an early relationship. After months of hard work building up a Mormon settlement in the Salt Lake Valley, a horde of crickets threatens to eat the whole people's crops. God intervenes by sending a flock of seagulls to destroy the crickets and save his people from famine. Brigham takes the miracle as a sign God is pleased with him and his leadership, and that in the forthcoming years the Mormons will build up a great people in Utah. Plus, Zina and Jonathan are finally going to get married. The film ends with shots of 1940 Salt Lake City, with a triumphant voiceover from Dean Jagger's Brigham Young.
And someday, good Lord, we'll build a great city here on the shores of Salt Lake. And when we do, we'll erect a monument to the glory of God.
Watching the film today, it's hard to miss the connection the filmmakers were drawing between the then current plight of European Jews with those of 1840s Mormons. And this was no mistake. Several of the screenwriters during the early writing process explicitly stated their desire to use the film as a rallying cry for Americans to help out Jews in the shadow of Hitler's Germany. Eleanor Harris, the first writer on the project, referred to current European affairs in a memo to the studio. With our eyes on today's headlines, nothing could be more topical than the story of the persecuted people who left their country because they must, and who, in the midst of desolation, built a triumphant empire. Zanuck himself was no stranger to releasing films tackling controversial current events, or even openly discussing anti-Semitism in film. Zanuck's 1935 picture, House of Rothschild, centered on a Jewish banking family's struggles to overcome anti-Semitism in 19th century Europe.
My bid was thrown out on a technicality.
A technicality?
Because I'm a Jew.
Calling out Germany, a major importer of Hollywood films, was unheard of in 1935. In part due to the film's timely themes, House of Rothschild was a massive hit for Zanuck, gaining large box office receipts as a trailblazing, although indirect, criticism of Hitler's reign. Reviewers and critics picked up on Brigham Young's connection with contemporary Jewish religious persecution. For instance, the San Francisco Call Bulletin wrote of Brigham Young, "Religious liberty, with the U.S. Constitution as its backer, is made a serious and coherent theme in the film's motivation." The Motion Picture News wrote, "It is difficult for us to believe that Mormons were persecuted in Missouri and Illinois with the savage bigotry of present-day Nazism, but such was the case." Not all critics were happy with the finished product, even if they agreed with the film's political undercurrent. Bosley Crowther, for instance, noted that, in spite of its studied effort to point a parallel between the wanderings of the off-oppressed Mormons and the children of Israel, it all boils down to just another heavy and conventional covered wagon truck film. He ended saying, "It's too bad that Brigham Young frontiersmen had to be so monotonous." Nice one, Boz. Like any Hollywood picture, the film does take significant steps away from historical events. Some small changes used to streamline the narrative can be more easily forgiven than those dramatically distorting the true nature of real-life characters and historical events. An easy-to-swallow historical inaccuracy, for example, is the fact that Brigham Young could not have given a speech at the Miracle of the Seagulls because he was back east in Nebraska at the time. Although inaccurate, the plot point in the film works to resolve both Young's insecurity in his calling and the Mormon survival in the Salt Lake City at the same time. While the film has plenty such minor historical exaggerations, there are three major instances of historical inaccuracies that dramatically alter the real-life characters and events portrayed in the film. First, the depiction of Brigham Young. Dean Jagger, who does a good job for what he's given to work with, portrays Brigham as a humble man struggling to gain guidance from God. The real-life Brigham, nicknamed the Lion of the Lord, publicly portrayed no such humility, always protruding forth stubbornness and resolute strength. Just Google some of his quotes and ask yourself if you could see Dean Jagger's character saying those out loud. Second, the simplistic comparison between 1840s Mormons and 1930s Jews. The film's attempt to paint the 1840s Mormons as equivalent to 1930s European Jews falls flat for the modern viewer. To be fair, the full scale of the atrocities the Nazis inflicted on Jews and other minority groups had not been fully revealed in 1940. However, the violence inflicted by Mormons in Illinois, as well as previously in Missouri, and the church leaders' frequent violent rhetoric is completely omitted. Of course, any persecution or infliction of violence is wrong. The Mormon-Illinois conflict is not as simple as bigots running out a peace-loving free people. The conflict is much more complicated than the plight of European Jews in pre-World War II Europe. Whitewashing this history makes for an easy-to-swallow cinematic story, but robs the audience of a more nuanced portrayal of both religious freedom and American history. Last but not least is the film's depiction of polygamy. Only in one key scene, when Zina confronts Jonathan about the practice, does the film directly call out polygamy.
Oh, but your Brigham Young will want you to marry a Mormon girl, won't he? Several of them.
Several?
Well, if you're going to be a rich man, you'll have to have a lot of wives, won't you?
Zina.
Then after you've married 20 or 30 of them, suppose you get to loving one more than all the rest put together. Then there's poor Jonathan, loving one and divided by 30.
Now, Zina, you're just talking nonsense and you know it.
There they'll be, all darning the same socks and cooking for the same man and all talking about their husband. Just imagine, 30 wives combing your beard.
After baring her heart to him, Jonathan simply reassures his intentions to marry her and kisses her, 100% ignoring her complaints and worries. The film similarly dismisses Zina's concerns by immediately following up this scene with Jonathan and Porter Rockwell discussing polygamy in a matter-of-fact, humorous manner.
I'm aiming to do my share.
Even if Zina's diatribe against polygamy is glossed over, it's still an impactful moment. I really can't think of another scene in classic film, and very few, as a matter of fact, in any film, that such passionately airs the critical opinion of women's polygamous experience in Mormonism. Other than Zina's brief scene, it's a major failing that the movie mostly treats polygamy merely as a joke, instead of addressing and portraying the heartbreak it caused its participants, the majority of which were women, in 19th century Mormonism. In the end, Brigham Young ended up losing the studio a substantial amount at the box office. It had a decently successful reputation among critics, but didn't quite have the audience support to recoup its massive budget. Even changing the title to Brigham Young Frontiersman didn't drum up the needed excitement amongst non-Mormon audiences to turn a profit. Subsequent films, from John Ford's 1950 Wagon Master to 1996's made-for-TV film Riders of the Purple Sage, would depict 19th century frontier Mormons, but in a vastly different way that reflected the major social milieus of their era. Today, instead of the hagiographic depiction of the faith in 1940's Brigham Young, we get more frank looks at the unsavory parts of the religion in such series as Big Love and Under the Banner of Heaven. Just like 20th Century Fox's Brigham Young reflected America's concern about religious freedom before World War II, modern portrayals of Mormons reflect America's current growing secular culture that allows for more critical portrayals of faith and religion. Although it's not an all-time classic, the story behind its creation and the reactions to the film begs for rediscovery, and provides a unique window into Hollywood and American history. And who knows, maybe Hollywood will turn back to Brigham Young, and his many wives, for another big-budget historical epic, replete with today's own reflections of the zeitgeist, to reframe the story of Brigham Young and his once fledgling faith.